The signal did not come through the main array. It came through the old one, the backup receiver that nobody used anymore, the one bolted to the lower hull back when the Resolute was first built, when the Concorde still used a frequency band that most species had abandoned 2 generations ago. Petty Officer Nils Strand only noticed it because the receiver blinked a small amber light on his secondary screen, and he had nothing else to do at that hour, and the light was the wrong color to ignore. He pulled it up. The audio was broken, lots of static, a voice underneath it, not human, not anything Nils recognized right away, speaking in short bursts between waves of interference. The translation system took a few seconds and then started producing broken text on his screen. Do not know if this reaches anyone. The soldiers came before the sun. Children are still inside the deep warrens. They do not stop, please. If anyone hears this, please. Nils sat very still for a moment. Then he got up and walked to Commander Dara Osai's ready room and knocked on the door. Dara was not sleeping. She rarely slept well on long transits. She was sitting with a reader in her lap and a half-empty glass of water on the table beside her when Nils came in, and she could tell from the way he held himself, too careful, too straight, that whatever he had found was not routine. She listened to the signal twice. She did not say anything while it played. When it finished the second time, she set her reader down and pulled up the navigational charts on her desk screen. Oreth 7, a Valorian colony, small, maybe 3,000 residents at last conquered census. Agricultural, no military installation, no defensive fleet. Located in the Oreth cluster, which was technically inside Concord space but so far out on the edge that Concord peacekeepers only swung through every few months. The nearest peacekeeper patrol was 19 hours away. The Resolute was 4. Dara sent a message to Gunnery Chief Rudo Balagun and Dr. Amara Solis and told them to come to the command deck. Then she told Nils to keep the signal running and to try to clean up the audio. When Rudo arrived, he looked at the star chart and at the signal transcript on the secondary screen and said nothing for a moment. He had been in the Navy long enough to read a situation quickly. He read this one. "We have no orders for that sector," he said. "No," Dara agreed. "Concord peacekeepers are the designated response force for Oreth cluster incidents. They are 19 hours away." Rudo looked at the chart again. "What are we dealing with? We don't even know who sent the signal." "Valorian dialect," Amara said. She had been quiet since she came in, standing near the back of the room, already studying the transcript on her personal screen. "The sentence structure is Valorian. High register, probably an elder. The frequency they used is ancient. It matches a Concord emergency band that was retired about 60 years ago. Whoever sent this was using very old equipment. Or the only equipment they had left," Dara said. Nobody spoke after that for a moment. Rudo rubbed the back of his neck. He was not arguing against going. Nils understood that. Rudo never argued against the right thing. He just needed to say the difficult parts out loud first, so they were on record, so everyone knew the weight of what they were choosing. "We go in without knowing what we're walking into," Rudo said. "We go in without orders. We go in on one signal from a backup receiver." "Yes," Dara said. "All right," he straightened up. "Then let's go find out what's happening." Dara turned to the helm and gave the order. The Resolute came around slow and massive, its course changing, its engines building up for the jump. Around the command deck, the crew moved with quiet efficiency, checking systems, running pre-jump checks, doing their jobs the way they always did. Nils went back to his station. He kept the old signal running in one ear. It had gone quiet by now. Either the transmitter had been found, or the power had died, or whoever was speaking had stopped. There was just static now, but he kept listening anyway because it felt wrong to turn it off. Amara stopped beside his station on her way back to the med bay. She looked at his screen for a moment, at the transcript, at the partial words the translation system had pulled out of the noise. "Children are still inside," she read quietly. "Yeah," Nils said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you know much about Valorians?" Nils shook his head. They're insectoid, communal, very gentle species. They don't have a word in their language for a weapon. Their architecture is all underground warrens, deep tunnels. When they're afraid, they go down. She paused. They've never had to fight anything. They've always relied on the conquered to keep them safe. Nils thought about that. Do they even know what we are, humans, I mean? Amara thought about it. Probably rumors. We haven't had much contact with Valorian colonies directly. Nils looked at the dead signal on his screen. Someone had called out into the dark without knowing if anything was listening, without knowing what might answer. Doesn't matter, he said, half to himself. Amara looked at him. I mean, they sent the signal. We heard it, that's the part that matters. He paused. Right. Amara nodded slowly. Yeah, she said, that's the part that matters. The Resolute jumped. The planet looked wrong from orbit. Not the planet itself. Oreth 7 was green and brown and quietly beautiful from a distance, a small warm world with shallow seas and wide flat plains. But there were things in orbit that should not have been there. 3 destroyers and 1 large command vessel, all bearing hull markings that did not match any conquered registry. The colony below had fires running along its northern edge. The defensive platforms that the conquered had installed 2 decades ago were scattered debris, tumbling slow and dark. Rudo looked at the sensor readout and said one word, very flat, Kreth. Dara had already seen it. The Kreth Dominion was not a conquered member. They operated in the space just outside the eastern edge of conquered territory and had been pushing closer for years, testing borders, claiming transit rights, sending survey ships into places they had not been invited. But this was not a survey ship. This was a fleet in someone else's space, above a burning colony. She opened a channel to the Kreth command vessel. The response came after a long pause, long enough that Dara understood they were deciding whether to respond at all. When the image came through, the Kreth admiral was large and armored even on his own bridge, with a flat, wide face and eyes that reflected light in 2 colors. He looked at Dara the way someone looks at a minor inconvenience. He introduced himself as Admiral Das of the Kreth Dominion 4th Fleet. He told her the Resolute was in the middle of a Kreth resettlement operation. He told her this matter did not involve the conquered. He told her to move her ship out of the patrol zone and continue on her original heading. Dara asked about the SOS signal. Das paused. Then he said the signal had been a malfunction from old equipment. He said the colony population was being relocated voluntarily. He said this with the specific kind of calm that people use when they have decided they do not need to be convincing. Dara said she would need to speak with a Valorian representative directly before she could accept that. Das told her that was not possible. Dara thanked him and closed the channel. She turned to Rudo. He was already looking at her. He already knew. The second signal came in 11 minutes after the Resolute arrived. Not on the old backup receiver this time, but on a short-range encrypted frequency, weak and tight, the kind a buried transmitter would produce if it was running on reserve power and trying not to be found. Nils pulled it up immediately and cleaned the audio as fast as he could. The voice was different from the first signal, older, more careful. The translation came through clearly this time. The speaker identified as Elder Shai of the Oreth 7 colony. Shai said there were 431 Valorian civilians sheltering in the deep root warrens beneath the colony center, the lowest levels, the ones the Kreth soldiers had not yet found. Among them were young ones. Shai said the food they had brought down would last 2 days, maybe less. Shai said the Kreth soldiers had been working through the upper warrens for most of the day and were getting closer. Shai said, I do not know what species you are. I saw from the hull markings that you are conquered. I do not know if you will help us. I am asking anyway. Dara listened to the whole message before she spoke. Then she looked at her crew, at Rudo, who had his arms crossed and his expression locked in the way it got when he was doing hard calculations, at Amara, who had come up to the command deck again and was standing near the viewport, at Nils, who had one hand pressed flat on his console like he needed something solid to hold onto. The Kreth destroyers had moved. They were in a blocking formation now between the Resolute and the planet spread wide. It was a message. It said, "You will not pass here." "One ship," Rudo said quietly. He was not arguing, he was stating. "Four of theirs." "Their destroyers are smaller than us," Dara said. "Their command vessel is equivalent tonnage, but it's not built for close engagement. Their hull plating is rated for long-range bombardment, not direct fire." "You've been looking at their specs?" "Since before we jumped." Rudo was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you need from me?" "Get your crews to their guns." Dara turned to Nils. "Send a message to Concord Command, not a request, a notification. Tell them INS Resolute is engaging hostile forces above Orath 7, Kreth Dominion Registry. Tell them we have confirmed civilian distress. Tell them to send everything available." Nils started typing before she finished the sentence. Dara looked at the Kreth formation on the display screen. 4 ships, her one. Below them, 431 people in the dark, waiting to be found. She thought about a signal going out into empty space from a broken transmitter on an old frequency, not knowing if anyone was listening. She thought about what it must have cost to send that signal, to call for help from a species you had only heard rumors about, creatures from a world so dangerous that most of the galaxy considered them something close to monsters. She thought about what it meant that the signal had found them anyway. "All stations," she said, "battle ready." The Resolute moved forward. Deep under the colony, Leet heard the distant thunder and did not know what it was. Elder Shai knew. Shai had listened to the transmitter's short burst of static after sending the message and had heard, faint and far, the automated signal of a conquered vessel acknowledging. Shai sat with that knowledge and held it carefully like something that might break. The other Valorians in the deep warren pressed close together in the dark, the young ones silent with fear. The adults keeping still and breathing slow did not know that anyone had answered. Shai decided to let them keep not knowing for now. Hope was a dangerous thing in a closed space. It made people move when they should stay still. The thunder came again, closer this time. The walls of the warren trembled very slightly. Leet pressed closer to Shai. Leet was young by Valorian measure, barely past the first molt, and had spent the whole day trying very hard not to make noise and almost succeeding. Now Leet's secondary eyes were open wide and fixed on the ceiling. "Is it the soldiers?" Leet asked, barely a sound. "No," Shai said. "The soldiers make smaller sounds. That is something much bigger." Above them, the Resolute had crossed the blocking line. The first Kreth destroyer fired almost immediately, a full spread, aggressive, intended to stop the dreadnought cold. Against most conquered ships it would have worked. The Resolute was not most conquered ships. It was a human-designed vessel built on the principle that a ship should be able to take a serious hit and keep doing its job. Redundant hulls, damaged compartments that could be sealed in seconds, systems that had manual backups and then backups for those. A crew that had trained specifically for the condition of everything going wrong at once, because the humans who designed training programs had decided that comfort was less important than survival. The spread hit. Sections of the outer hull took damage. 3 crew members in the forward compartment were injured. The Resolute kept going. Rudo's gun crews were already locked. They returned fire with the kind of precision that came from a gunnery chief who ran his teams through simulations twice a week and had no patience for wasted shots. The first destroyer took 3 direct hits in 30 seconds. Its engines went dark. It drifted. The other 2 destroyers spread wide, trying to flank. The Kreth command vessel held back, watching, recalculating. On the command deck, Dara watched the tactical display and made decisions in the space between seconds. The Resolute was taking hits. Not catastrophic, not yet, but the damage board was lighting up in places she did not like. She rerouted power. She called down to engineering and got reports back in flat, efficient language from people who were already working the problems without being asked. That was the thing about human crews that other species never quite understood. The Conquered had interviewed human officers about it after their first joint exercises, and the officers had struggled to explain it. It was not that humans did not feel fear. They did. It was that they had grown up on a planet that was actively trying to kill them in 17 different ways, and at some point, their species had simply gotten used to fear being present and choosing to work anyway. Fear was just another condition. You noted it and moved on. Amara appeared at Dara's side. She had her field kit over one shoulder, and her expression was the careful kind that meant she had already decided something and was now explaining it. "I need to go down," she said. Dara looked at her. "The drop team is 4 combat specialists, and one of them speaks Velorian." Dara said nothing. "When those 4 come running through the dark toward 400 terrified Velorians, someone needs to be there who can tell them to stay still, that we are not the Kreth, that we are here to help. If nobody says that in a language they understand," Amara stopped. "They could panic. People die in panics in enclosed spaces." Dara held the silence for 3 more seconds. Then, "You stay behind the combat team at all times." "Yes. If I pull the team out, you come. No debate." "Understood." Dara turned back to her display. "Get to the pod bay, 3 minutes." The drop pod carried 5. Amara and 4 combat crew went down fast, a hard, burning re-entry designed to be quick and difficult to track rather than comfortable. Nils watched the pod on sensors from his station and did not say anything, but his hands were very still on his console. In the Warren, the thunder had stopped. The silence was worse. Leet was counting seconds without meaning to, the way young Velorians did when they were frightened, an old instinct, something about marking time helping the nervous system settle. Then there was a new sound, close. Above the entry stone, maybe 20 body lengths up, maybe less, footsteps, heavy, regular, moving in a pattern. Shai recognized the pattern. Shai had been listening to it for hours, Kreth soldiers searching. They were close now, very close. Leet looked at Shai. Shai put one limb gently on Leet's back and held it there, steady, and looked back. Outside the drop pod's small porthole, Orith 7 came up fast. The drop pod hit hard in a flat field 2 kilometers from the colony center. Before the dust had settled, the hatch was open and all 5 of them were moving. The combat team, specialists Fen, Odua, and Priya, and Petty Officer Nils Strand, who had told Dara he was a trained secondary combatant, and who had not mentioned that his hands were shaking until they stopped, spread into a perimeter without being told to. Amara was behind them, her kit tight against her back, her translation earpiece already running. The colony above ground was mostly quiet. That was the kind of quiet that meant something. Smoke from the northern edge. 2 buildings in the center had collapsed. The streets were empty except for the litter of things dropped when people ran, a woven basket, several flat agricultural tools, one small toy Amara did not let herself look at for more than a second. The Kreth soldiers they met at the colony entrance were not expecting anyone to come from the sky. The fight was fast and close. Amara pressed flat against a building wall and listened to it. She had done field work before, but always after the shooting. This was different. The sounds were wrong, too sharp, and she could feel them in her teeth. It was over in under 2 minutes. Fen had a cut on her arm from something she did not bother to mention. Everyone was moving again. They found the Warren entrance from Shai's coordinates. A flat stone in the floor of what had been a seed storage building, just barely distinguishable from the surrounding floor if you did not know what you were looking for. Amara looked at it and thought about what it must have been like to design a home that could disappear, to build your most important spaces underground so thoroughly that no one walking above would know you were there. She thought about what kind of history produced that kind of architecture. She knocked on the stone in the pattern Shai had described. 3 slow, 2 fast, 3 slow. Nothing. She did it again, waited, pulled up the Velorian phrase she had been rehearsing since the ship and said it out loud, carefully, into the crack at the stone's edge. The phrase was simple. It meant, "I come with quiet hands." It was an old Velorian greeting used when approaching a nest, an assurance that the one approaching was not a threat, was not carrying anything meant to cause harm. Amara's pronunciation was not good. She knew that, but she said it clearly and at the right speed and hoped it was good enough. A crack of light appeared at the stone's edge. Then a Valorian eye, multifaceted, wide, catching the dim light of the building, looked through the crack at her. Amara went very still. She let the translation unit keep running, set to Valorian dialect. She did not reach for anything. She did not move toward the stone. She sat down on the ground, slowly and deliberately, so that she was lower than the crack, lower than the eye looking out at her. She made herself small in the only way available to her. A human being is never going to be small, but posture matters, and she understood that. The eye watched her for a long time. Then the stone shifted. Leet stepped out, trembling. Every joint in the visible legs was vibrating very slightly. The secondary eyes were half closed the way Amara had read that Valorians did when they were controlling fear. And yet Leet had stepped out, had chosen to step into the uncertainty, on the strength of a badly pronounced phrase from a creature Leet had never seen before. That took something. Amara was aware of that. She said very quietly in Valorian, "Are you hurt?" Leet stared at her. Then in careful, accented Concord standard, "You speak Valorian." "A little, not well." "It was good enough," Leet said, and there was something in the translation, some quality the processor barely caught, that Amara thought might have been relief. Elder Shai came through next, slow and deliberate. Shai looked at Amara, looked at the combat team behind her, armored and large and still, weapons lowered. Shai looked at the smoke coming from the northern buildings visible through the doorway. Then Shai looked back at Amara. "You came from the ship," Shai said, "not a question." "Yes." "The one fighting the Kreth ships above us." "Yes." Shai was quiet for a moment. "How many of your people are up there?" "About 300, on the ship." Shai processed this. 300 against 4 Kreth ships. "That's right." Another silence. In the earpiece, Amara could hear the Resolute's communications channel, Rudo's voice, flat and steady, calling out targeting coordinates. Something about that sound, the ordinariness of it, a person doing a difficult job and sounding like they were doing a difficult job, settled something in her chest. Shai said, "Why did you come, truly?" Amara thought about how to answer. She thought about Nils and the amber light on the backup receiver. She thought about Dara standing at the helm chart at that quiet hour. "Someone sent a signal," she said. "We heard it." Shai looked at her for a long time. Then Shai turned back to the Warren entrance and began to speak, quietly, to the darkness below, telling 400 frightened people that it was time to move. Moving 431 Valorians through a burning colony was nothing like the simulations. The simulations had people who could run, who understood the commands, who were not stopping every few meters because a sound overhead made them freeze with every joint locked and every eye shut in the ancient blind still fear response that Valorian biology had hardwired in over thousands of years. Amara learned fast. When the freezing happened, she would move up, get low, make herself visible to whoever had stopped and speak. Not the Valorian words for move or hurry, but the old ones, the calm ones, the words that Shai had told her were used between adults and young ones in the deep dark of the Warrens when something frightening had happened. "I am here. The ground holds. Come forward." The words were simple and they worked. Not every time and not fast, but they worked. Leet stayed close to her. Not from fear, at least not only from fear. Leet was watching her with that careful Valorian attention and asking questions in a low voice while they moved, because curiosity and terror were apparently not mutually exclusive in Valorian biology. "How long can your people go without water?" Leet asked, at one point completely seriously. "About 3 days," Amara said, scanning the route ahead. "Without food, longer." "We heard your people do not sleep properly." "We sleep, just not as much as some species." "We heard your planet has things that eat you." "Quite a few things." "How do you survive long enough to build ships?" Amara almost laughed. "We're stubborn." The column was about halfway to the landing zone when the new soldiers arrived. They came from the east, a drop from the Kreth command vessel, 12 soldiers in heavy gear, responding to the loss of contact with the patrol that Fen and Odua had dealt with at the Warren entrance. Fen saw them first on her scanner and called it out. The combat team went to work immediately, spreading, using the colony buildings as cover, keeping the Kreth's attention on them and away from the column. The problem was noise. Every shot made the Valorians freeze. The column stalled completely. Amara made a decision. She moved up the column to where the worst of the freezing was happening, near the middle, where the youngest ones were grouped, and she started singing. Not a Valorian song, just the first thing that came to her, low and steady, a tune from her childhood, something her grandmother had sung. Meaningless words in a language none of the Valorians knew, but a sound that was continuous and calm in the middle of the noise. One of the young Valorians looked at her, then moved. The ones near it moved. The column started again. Nils took a hit somewhere in that stretch. Not a fatal one. The shot clipped his left side and the combat armor did its job, but the force of it put him down for a few seconds, and the injury underneath was bad enough that he could not carry his full kit anymore. Amara patched him in the gap between two buildings in under 3 minutes, field dressing, compression. A fast assessment that said no organs, no arterial, painful but manageable. Nils stood up. He kept moving. He did not mention it again. Above the planet, the Resolute was being tested in ways that did not show up in any manual. The second Kreth destroyer had gotten its engines back and repositioned. The third was hitting the Resolute's port side in coordinated bursts with the command vessel, trying to force a reactor shutdown through accumulated stress. In engineering, 2 teams were running full manual control of the shield grid because the automatic systems had taken damage. The crew was talking in short sentences and working in the way that people work when they have decided they are not going to stop. Rudo called down to Amara's earpiece. You have maybe 40 minutes before the repositioned destroyer gets line of sight for a ground strike. Move faster. Working on it, Amara said. How much faster? As fast as 400 people who freeze at loud noises can move. A pause. Right, Rudo said, in the voice of a man recalibrating. Then something else happened, something that nobody had planned for. Shai, who had been moving near the back of the column helping the slowest ones, stopped completely. Amara turned and saw Shai standing in the middle of the street looking up. Amara came back fast. Shai, we have to move. I know, Shai said, without looking down. The ancient eyes were fixed on the sky, on the dark shape of the Resolute visible even from the surface as a point of reflected light moving against the stars, surrounded by smaller flashes. Is that your ship? Yes. It is taking damage. Yes. For us, Shai said, not a question. Amara looked up for 1 second. The Resolute was still there, still moving, still between the colony and the guns above. Yes, she said. Shai was quiet for a moment. Then the ancient Valorian turned and began moving again and faster than before. Shai moved up the column, speaking in rapid Valorian, and something passed through the group like a current. The pace changed. Even the ones who had been freezing the most were moving now. Amara caught up to Leet. What did Shai say to them? Leet's answer was simple. The humans are bleeding for us. We do not make them wait. The last of the Valorians stepped onto the evacuation transport 22 minutes before the Conquered response fleet arrived. Amara knew because Nils told her over the earpiece, his voice a little rough from the injury and from what felt like a very long day, and she counted the number herself, standing at the transport ramp, watching them come aboard, a steady flow of small bodies in the dark. She counted because she needed to know, not for the report, just for herself. 431. All of them. She was the last one onto the ramp. She looked back at the colony for a moment, at the smoke, at the broken buildings, at the place these people had built and lived in and grown up in and would have to leave. Then she sealed the hatch. Above the planet, Dara got the confirmation from Amara and turned to Rudo. Ground team is aboard, she said. Rudo nodded. He did not look relieved because the hard part was not over yet. The Kreth command vessel had moved while they were watching the ground situation, and it was now sitting in a line between the Resolute and the evacuation transport's launch corridor. The destroyer had repositioned. The orbital bombardment array on the command vessel was cycling up. Nils's replacement at the comms station had caught the energy signature 3 minutes ago and reported it immediately. If that array fired at the surface, the transport was still in the blast radius. Dara looked at the tactical display. She looked at the damage board, at all the lights that were the wrong color. She looked at the distance between the Resolute and the Kreth command vessel. Then she looked at Rudo. Rudo looked back at her. He had worked with her for 6 years. He did not need her to explain. "Point defense only on the bombardment array," he said, already turning to his crew. "Main batteries on the command vessel. Tell engineering we are going in close." "How close?" one of the junior gun crew asked. "Close enough that they cannot aim the bombardment array at the surface without hitting themselves," Dara said. The Resolute moved in. What followed lasted 9 minutes and was discussed afterward in Concord War College simulations for the next 40 years, not because it was elegant, but because it should not have worked and did. A dreadnought pressing to knife-fighting range against a command vessel is not a tactic. It is a declaration. It says, "We are willing to absorb everything you have so that you cannot aim past us." The Kreth commander, Admiral Das, had fought many battles. He had never fought a species that would do this. He had never fought a crew that could take what the Resolute took in those 9 minutes and keep all the guns running. The bombardment array went offline. The command vessel took 3 full broadsides from the Resolute's remaining batteries at a range that was close enough to be almost dangerous to both ships. The 2 Kreth destroyers, without the command vessel coordinating them, broke formation. The evacuation transport launched clean and clear through the gap. When the Concord response fleet arrived, 6 ships, a mix of frigates and a heavy cruiser, the situation they found was: 1 Kreth command vessel drifting without engine power, 2 destroyers with their weapons powered down, 1 previously disabled Kreth destroyer with a rescue beacon running, and the INS Resolute sitting in the middle of it all, hull scored and dark in sections. 1 antenna bent at an angle that suggested it had been hit and partially welded back by someone in a hurry, but still broadcasting on all standard frequencies. The incoming Concord admiral hailed the Resolute. He asked for a status report. Dara gave it, brief, accurate, the kind of report that describes the facts in the order they happened without adjectives. The admiral was quiet for a long moment after. Then he asked for the casualty count. Dara gave it, 7 injured, none killed. Another silence. "Commander Osai," the admiral said slowly, "1 dreadnought held 4 Kreth warships long enough to evacuate 431 civilians with 7 casualties." "Yes, sir." "How?" Rudo was at the back of the bridge. He answered before Dara could. His voice was calm and a little tired and absolutely matter-of-fact. "Deathworlders, sir." 3 days later, aboard the evacuation transport, Elder Shai sat with Leet in the quiet of the cargo hold. Most of the others were resting. Shai was not. Shai held a small flat stone, a smooth piece of the Warren floor taken at the last moment, something from home. Leet sat close. "Will we go back?" Leet asked. "Someday," Shai said. "The Concord will make the Kreth answer for it. These things take time." Leet was quiet. Then, Amara. She sat down on the ground when she spoke to me, so she would be lower so I would not be afraid. Shai said nothing, listening. She did not have to do that. I do not think she even thought about it. Shai looked at the stone. There is a word in Old Valorian, very old. No good translation in Concord Standard. It means the kind of strength that spends itself for something smaller, the kind that bends down. Do the humans have a word for it? Shai considered for a long time. I do not think they need one. I think for them it is simply what strength is for. Far behind the transport, the INS Resolute was still in the Oreth system, holding station. It would be there all night. It would be there in the morning. It would be there until the job was done.